Hi, it's Marzi. I'm going to try and do this really briefly. I've attempted to do it several times and it's banged on incessantly. So can you please bear with me? I don't anticipate this to be as long as what the previous attempts were. Today is the anniversary of me being hospitalised with bacterial and viral infections in my lymph nodes under my arms, which started the onset of my severe myalgic encephalomyelitis. It's always a hard time, but it's particularly hard because of everything that's happened with the loss of Dad and having to move and Mum and I grieving, etc. There's some stuff I just want to quickly address. It's stuff that I guess stupidly, I assume that people understand or perceive or know my reality because I'm so frank about it. But there's things that apparently they don't. So I want to clarify some stuff. The first thing I want to clarify is that for 18 years I've been sick. I was getting this kind of infection under my arms while working a couple of months up to when it got to, like, it was just like it wasn't hardcore until I ended up with these lumps that were like fists under my arms, 6 lumps, and I couldn't put my arms down. And during that period, I have experienced the most abhorrent abuse and treatment by medical professionals and some people whom I love and people I worked with. To be fair, it was a confusing time because I was so incredibly ill, and yet because I didn't know what was wrong with me and they didn't know at first what was wrong with me, and when I had diabetes and they thought I had diabetes insipidus, everyone sort of flocked to me because if you've got something people understand, they are really supportive. But as soon as you have something that there's some sort of stigma about, people treat you very badly. And it made me self-destructive because I was a very outgoing person who suddenly felt like I was being shunned and just treated really badly by people in general. So that's been going on a long time, but I am someone who has integrity. It's built into who I am. It's the very definition of who I am as a person. And so to find out sort of in the last year or so that there's people who doubt my reality and the severity of it, people who are acquaintances, people who I love, whatever, has been really hurtful. I would understand that the thought process behind pretending to be sick if I was pretending to have an illness that garnered support, but I'm not pretending anything and I don't have an illness that gets support, so there's no reward in me pretending to have this, and certainly not for 18 years. The other thing is that it was sort of floated as a theory that I might have mental illness. If I had a mental illness, I would happily tell you. I don't do these updates to convince people who don't believe in my reality of my reality. I do it for advocacy and awareness, for those who are healthy, who want to understand more about it, and for those who are sick and who remind me of me when I first got sick. There's a different kind of access to information now, but when I got sick, there was I didn't have the internet, nobody texted anyone, I didn't have access to anyone. So when I got sick, I was very alone, and I went from being an incredibly outgoing person with so many friends just insane amounts of friends and not acquaintances. I still don't know how I managed to juggle these intense relationships, but I did, to being in four walls and just not speaking to anyone, really, not being able to function. So I think of the people who aren't as strong as me, who are sick like me, and despite the fact they've got access to online interactions, and some of them don't, some can't go online. Like at the moment I'm avoiding social media because I'm finding it too much, and that, you know, that creates isolation. But I want to give them someone that they can recognise as being similar to themselves. So the mental illness theory, the thing that I have issue with, is that it stems from ignorance. If you don't understand my illness, that's fine. Everyone doesn't know everything. I'm the authority on my reality. You can choose to believe that what I'm telling you is true. But if you don't believe, or you have doubts, or you don't understand it, or someone's got in your ear and told you some rubbish that's made you second guess me, take the time to look up research into severe myalgic encephalomyelitis and severe Lyme disease and co-infections, or chronic for either of them. And there's a plethora of other illnesses that I have that impact me dramatically, but they're the two main ones, and that you will be stunned by the research and the data and what the specialists in those illnesses have to say about these illnesses. Don't go looking for support for your argument that my reality isn't real, because that's just not using critical thinking. It's lazy. And if you go and read all the support of my illness and the research and the stuff that is said by the doctors and specialists who treat people like me and who say we suffer in ways that HIV patients don't even suffer, because HIV patients had a lot of awareness that they worked very hard for, and they have access to treatment nowadays, so they're able to live an almost normal life. So I'm not discrediting them, I'm just saying it's not our time yet. We don't have that access. So go and look that up and then come back and reassess your perspective, because that's what I would do. I have a friend whose son is very ill, and he has a symptom that is the same as a symptom I get. And it's actually a cluster of symptoms, but it's all under the same name. It's called dystonia. It's a movement disorder, and it's one that I have suffered with throughout my illness. But when the onset of Lyme disease happened in about, it was probably about 8-10 years ago. It's hard to tell, but I went through a 2-year period of having every version of dystonia that you can have all at once, all day, every day, and nobody knew what was happening to me, and I wasn't on treatment. So I made this off-the-cuff comment to her in support of her son, and belatedly realised that in the text and the language that I'd used, it sounded callous, and that I was minimising his experience, because I've had to learn to treat my symptoms like they're no big deal so that I can cope. But they're not no big deal for a child. And afterwards I was like, oh no, and cringing and thinking, why did I say that? So I messaged her and I said, I'm so sorry. I wasn't thinking about how that sounded. That wasn't what I intended. And I want you to know that I want to know more about his illness. I want to understand it. I don't want to be ignorant. Can you tell me where the resources are to look it up, and I'll read about it? And that's what I did. I went and read about his illness so that I could understand. Now that's what I would do. That's what I expect that you do before you make judgment calls about me. Because it's insanely arrogant and condescending to assume you know better than I do. The other thing is that I am someone who doesn't pull punches. That said, obviously, there's a lot of things like this that I've just kept to myself, for the fact that it's negative and I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about people being dismissive and condescending, although it's the reality and it's awful, and I've been abused and physically abused and whatever. It's a whole other story. But there's a kind of a disconnect with my reality, in the sense that I even have one of my best friends thought, because I have a really large family, that we had, with Mum and I, have this really great support system, but we don't. Having a lot of people in your family does not equal support. My family, a lot of them didn't understand and didn't get it or couldn't cope with it. And most of them have come round in the last 4 years, when it's become blatantly obvious, because of my neurological conditions, that the symptoms are just so, you can't ignore my reality when you see it. But Mum and I spend most of our time alone, and when my siblings come to visit, they come at a time that suits them, because they're busy, they've got partners, kids, work, everything's juggling act, and they come when I'm asleep because traffic's intense, and they leave when I'm asleep. So they see Mum very occasionally. They very, very rarely see me. My younger sister has believed from the start and has been there from the start, but she and I are very close, and so it's different dynamic, you know. So there's this, this is kind of, just want to clarify that our reality is not one where I have a fantastic support system. The truth is, I spend most days mute. I don't talk to anyone. I often text or try and call people, and they're either too sick or too busy to respond. And I don't see anyone. So my father died, and that was a horrific experience, because he was an addict who was not good to me, and then he finally gave up his addiction of alcohol, and he gave it up, and then I thought I was going to get a chance to reconcile with him, and before I could even blink, he was dying very suddenly, overnight, and I didn't get to go say goodbye to him, because I didn't want to distract my family from being able to be present for him in his last moments. So I stayed at home by myself as one of my friends came to be with me as my father passed away, and I wasn't able to touch him or say goodbye or reconcile or anything that I needed to resolve. Is now never going to happen. So Mum and I both have to live in this reality where we've got this very complicated grief, and we're very different, which is perfectly normal. I express things, she's not expressive, so we're not emotionally supporting each other. We're both being very reactive, even though we're trying not to be, and so it's a very stressful and difficult environment, and we're doing our best. We used to laugh all the time and just really get along well, but this is an awful time, and it's normal that because we're grieving, things are hard. But my point is, it means we're even more isolated than we normally would be, and we're normally very isolated. If we don't even have each other, that is way more isolating. It just makes it so hard. So then comes my next point, which is in terms of my financial hardship. Firstly, I am not remotely ashamed about my financial situation. I didn't create this situation. I didn't do anything to deserve this illness. There's nothing that I've done that makes me feel ashamed. So I have this perception that sometimes when I say things, people don't necessarily think I'm being exacting or literal. I am always literal. So when I say to you I've got no money, I mean I've got 47 cents in the bank. Some people, when they say they have no money, they will have a couple of grand in a savings account that they don't consider to be money they can access. And so subconsciously they put it out of their mind as an account that they don't touch, and it's not money that they consider. Do you understand what I mean? They don't consider it, and it's not something, they're not lying. They're just in their mind. It's a savings account to buy a house or to buy a car or for emergencies or whatever. That's not my situation. If I say I've got no money, if I say I've got no food, if I say I've got no meds, if I say I have no access to treatment, I mean it. I mean none. Nothing. Mum and I are currently eating one meal a day. We have breakfast, which is coffee. It's more like brunch, lunch. A coffee and maybe like two mini muffins, and then dinner, hopefully, if I can cook it, if not a smoothie. That's all we eat all day. Mum sometimes has cereal, but that's not exactly, healthy food. So we're struggling intensely. My clothes are falling apart, Mum's clothes are falling apart, my sheets are falling apart, Mum's sheets are falling apart. We're just financially in a really bad situation. And I feel like there's probably a lot of compassion fatigue around, and people are struggling after Christmas and stuff, and this, it's hard. And I don't know, I guess I don't know how to make anyone understand without you actually being proactive and looking up my reality online and seeing it in other people, and maybe looking at documentaries like Under My Skin, which is a documentary about Lyme disease, and Unrest, documentary about myalgic encephalomyelitis. Without watching those sorts of things, and you can watch the Unrest on Netflix, without watching those, you just won't get a sense of what it's really like. And so you can't possibly then maintain this constant compassion for years on end for me. Or certainly not everyone can. People become hardened to it. But I'm no street can shaker barging up against you and aggressively asking you for money. I'm just telling you that I am at breaking point, and so is Mum, and that we're doing our very best, but it's in impossible odds. Things have never been harder, and I feel heartsick. Anyway, the only other thing I wanted to say about the mental illness point is that I have friends with mental illness, and obviously it's a biological condition. Just because you can't see it doesn't make it less valid than an illness that is physically manifesting. So, say I did have a mental illness, which again I don't. I've been assessed by psychiatrists, psychologists, neuropsychologists, all of them. I'm clear. So, the amateur psychiatry's got to go. But say I did, right? Just for the sake of argument. Why is that less important? Do you understand the damage you do by saying that mental illness is somehow something to be ashamed of, or something that is not as important? Because it's not. I have people who's in my life who are crippled by mental illness, and they hate it. It's awful. And just because I can't see it doesn't make it less valid, and doesn't give me the right to undermine it. So just check yourself before you say things. You've got to be careful. Anyway, on this anniversary of falling so terribly ill in such a dramatic way, I guess I just needed to say this stuff to you that I feel like is just not understood about me. And I really hope you stuck with me. This is the shortest version of this I've managed to achieve. So on that note, I'm going to go. I hope you have a nice long weekend. Thank you to those who do support me. Thank you to those who have supported me. Thank you to those who give what they can, no matter how big or small. Thank you to those who want to give, who can't give, but do their best to support me emotionally or share or whatever. Just thank you. To those who are not here for me, please just go. If you don't believe in me and you're not willing to try and educate yourself, rather than just try and back up your own version of what you think's going on, please just go away, okay? It doesn't serve me or you to have you here. I'm doing this for people who are alone, who are sick, who don't have other people who understand. I'm doing this for the people who care enough to learn about my reality. And if that's not you, why waste your time and mine? So again, thank you to everyone in my life who's ever supported me in any way, and many who continue to do so in various ways. Know that it matters to me, and I love you guys. And yeah, it's a hard day. I miss Dad, and I don't want to be sick anymore. Okay. Love, light, blessings, and gratitude. Marzi.